Once upon a time, there was a young man whose name was Morgan. Morgan didn't have any brains. He couldn't take care of himself. He really wanted some brains, and he found out that the old woman on the other side of the mountain sold brains. So he said to his mother, "Mother, I'm going to go see the old woman and see if I can buy a pot of brains." His mother was so anxious for him to get a pot of brains so that he could take care of himself that she told him to go see the old woman. Morgan went to see the old woman. He knocked on the door. The old woman came to the door. He said, "I hear you sell brains." She said, "Well, if you want king's brains or prime minister's brains, I don't have any." Morgan said, No, I just want ordinary brains so that I can take care of myself." The old woman said, "I do have ordinary brains to sell, but first you will have to bring me the heart of the thing you love the most." Morgan went home, and he said to his mother that night, "Mother, we have to kill the nanny goat." She said, "Whatever for, Morgan?" Morgan said, "I cannot buy a pot of brains from the old woman until I bring her the heart of the thing I love the most. And, Mother, I do love that nanny goat." His mother said, "Morgan, I am so anxious for you to get a pot of brains so that you can take care of yourself that we will." So they killed the nanny goat, and Morgan took the nanny goat's heart to the old woman the next day. He said, "I brought you the heart of the thing I love the most, my nanny goat." The old woman said, "Fine, answer this riddle for me. What is it that is always running and has no feet?" Morgan thought and thought and thought and thought, and couldn't get the answer to the riddle. The old woman said, "I'm sorry, Morgan, I cannot sell you a pot of brains. You have not brought me the heart of the thing you love the most." Morgan went home. As he got close to the villagers rushed up to him and said, "Morgan, come quickly, your mother's dying." He got to his mother's bedside just before she died. She said, "Morgan, I'm dying. I will not be here to take care of you. I do hope you can buy a pot of brains so that you can take care of yourself." And she died. Morgan realized then it was his mother he loved the most. So, not wanting to cut out her heart, he just wrapped her in a blanket and took her to the old woman the next day. He said, "I brought you the heart of the thing I love the most, my mother." The old woman said, "Fine, answer this riddle for me. What is it that is yellow and shiny and is not gold?" Morgan thought and thought and thought and couldn't get the answer to the riddle. The old woman said, "I'm sorry, Morgan, I cannot sell you a pot of brains. You have not brought me the heart of the thing you love the most." Morgan went home. He sat down on a log and he started to cry. A young woman walked by and said, "Morgan, why in the world are you crying?" He said, "I'm crying because my mother's dead. She's not here to take care of me. I don't have any brains. I can't take care of myself." The young woman said, "Morgan, you can marry me." And he said, "Well, can you cook?" And she said, "Yes." "Can you sew?" And she said, "Yes." "Can you keep house?" And she said, "Yes." Morgan said, "Fine, I'll marry you." So Morgan married his wife, and he knew it was she he loved the most. And he said to her one day, "You know, dear, I really would like to go buy a pot of brains so that I can take care of myself, but I've got to take the old woman the heart of the thing I love the most before she'll sell me a pot of brains. And I don't want to cut out your heart." The girl said, "Morgan, don't be absurd. Take me as I am." So the next day, Morgan and his wife went to see the old woman. He said, "I brought you the heart of the thing I love the most, my wife." The old woman said, "Fine, answer this riddle for me. What is it that has always been, and yet is new every month?" Morgan thought and thought and thought and thought, and his wife said, "Morgan, it's the moon." Morgan said to the old woman, "It's the moon." The old woman said, "Yes, Morgan, you're right." He said, "Now may I have my pot of brains?" The old woman said, "Morgan, you don't need a pot of brains. Your wife has enough for both of you." Once upon a time, there lived a peasant who had a daughter. Now, the peasant farmed land which the king had loaned him. One day, when the peasant was farming his land, he dug up a mortar. He said to his daughter, "Daughter, we must take this mortar to the king." His daughter said, "Father, a mortar must have a pestle. Wait until we find the pestle before you take the mortar to the king." And the father said, "No, no, no, this is the king's land. He's loaned it to me. I've found this mortar on his land. I must take it to the king immediately." So he took it to the king. The king said to the peasant, "Where is the pestle?" The farmer said, I only found the mortar." The king said, "A mortar and pestle go together. You must have the pestle. Where is the pestle?" And the farmer said, "I only found the mortar." Well, the king was so angry, he had the peasant thrown in jail. A couple of days later, the guard went up to the king and said, "Sire, ever since that peasant was put in jail, all he has done is call out, 'Oh, if I'd only listened to my daughter. Oh, if I'd only listened to my daughter.'" The king said, "Bring the peasant to me." The peasant was brought to the king, and the king said, "I understand that for 2 days you've done nothing but call out, 'Oh, if I'd only listened to my daughter.'" And the farmer said, "Yes. When I dug up the mortar, my daughter told me not to bring it to you until I'd also found the pestle." The king said, "Your daughter is a wise woman. If she can come to me tomorrow, neither clothed nor unclothed, neither riding nor walking, neither on the road nor off the road, I will make her my queen." The farmer went home and told his daughter what the king had said. The next day, The daughter took all of her clothes off, so she was not clothed. She wrapped herself in a huge fishing net so that she was not unclothed. She put one leg over a donkey so that she was not walking, but the other leg was on the road so that she was not riding. The leg on the road she dragged along in a rut by the side of the road so that she was not on the road nor off the road. When the king saw her coming, he knew she had solved the riddle and married her. She was his queen. He told her, however, at their wedding, that she must never, never, never interfere with any decisions he made, or if she did, he would send her back to her father. She agreed. Several years went by, and the queen was as happy as could be, and so was the king. But one day, on market day, the farmers were bringing all of their provisions, their products to the marketplace, and a horse foaled. The baby horse got up on its wobbly legs and fell down between two oxen. Now the owner of the oxen said that the horse belonged to him. The owner of the horse said the foal belonged to him. They argued, and finally they asked the king. The king said, well, I think that the horse belongs to the owner of the animals where the horse was found. So the owner of the oxen got to keep the horse. Now this made the owner of the horse very unhappy, and he brooded about it and wondered what he could do about it, and finally he heard from someone that the queen was a very wise woman. He went to the queen and told her what had happened. The queen told him what to do. The next day, as the king was out making his rounds, he saw a farmer with a fishing net throwing the fishing net on the dusty road and pretending to gather up fish, and he was puzzled by what was going on. He had a servant go over to the farmer and ask him what he was doing. The servant went over to the farmer and said, "The king wants to know what you're doing." He said, "I am fishing." The servant went back to the king and said, "Sire, the farmer says that he is fishing." The king said, "Bring the farmer to me." The farmer was brought to the king, and the king said, "How can you catch fish on a dry, dusty road?" The farmer said, "Sire, it is as easy to catch fish on a dusty road as it is for an ox to give birth to a horse." The king said, "Who has helped you with this? Who presented this situation to you?" And the farmer wouldn't say. And the king was so angry with him that he had him thrown in jail, and after several days the farmer admitted that the queen had given him this advice. The king then said to the queen, "I told you you may not interfere with any decisions I make. You have interfered, therefore it is necessary for me to send you back to your father. And when you leave, you may take with you one thing that you cherish dearly." The queen said, "Very well, but could we have dinner together before I leave?" The king said yes. And while the king had the cart ready to take the queen back to her father, the queen prepared dinner, and she put a sleeping potion in the king's wine. He drank the wine and fell sound asleep. The queen had some servants put him in the cart, which was to carry her back to her father's house. The king slept all that night. He slept all of the next day. He slept all of that night. The next morning he woke up in the peasant's cottage. He called out, "Where am I?" He called for his servants. No one appeared. Finally the queen walked in. He said, "Where am I, and what am I doing here?" The queen said, "Husband, you told me when I left that I could take one thing with me that I cherished dearly. You were what I cherished most." The king said, "You are a clever, wise woman." And from that time on, the king involved the queen in every decision he made. Once upon a time there lived a woman who was very, very poor. She loved eels, but could rarely afford to buy eels. Fortunately, however, she lived next door to the eel seller. Every day the eel seller would go to the ocean, catch his eels, bring them home, clean them, cut them, and cook them over a hot charcoal fire. On days when the old woman could not afford to buy eels, she would take her bowl of rice and sit outside the eel smeller's home to smell the eels cooking over the hot charcoal fire. When the eel seller found out what she was doing, he was furious and presented her with a bill. She bowed and smiled politely and invited him into her home. She took down her iron money box. Now, she only had a few coins in her iron money box, but it doesn't take many coins to make a loud jingle in an iron money box, and she shook that iron money box. Then she said, "Neighbor, did you hear that?" He said, "Indeed I did." She said, "Now we are even." He said, "What? You refuse to pay me?" She said, "You have charged me for the smell of eels. I have paid you with the sound of money." Once upon a time, there lived a woman who had 3 daughters. One had one eye. Her name was One Eye. Another had 2 eyes. She was called Two Eyes. The third had 3 eyes. Her name was Three Eyes. Now the mother was partial to One Eye and Three Eyes because they were different and unusual. She had very little love and affection for Two Eyes because Two Eyes was ordinary and commonplace, and so she made Two Eyes do all of the work. Two Eyes had to gather the wood and light the fire, cook the food, scrub the pots and pans, and clean the house. And every day she had to take the goat to pasture. Two Eyes was given for dinner what her mother and 2 sisters had not eaten, and it was usually only a dried crust of bread. One day when Two Eyes was in the pasture with the goat, she sat down and started to cry. An old woman appeared and said, "Two Eyes, why are you crying?" She said, "I'm crying because I'm hungry." The old woman said, "Say these words to your goat. Bleat, little goat, bleat. Prepare a table with something to eat. And when you've finished eating, say these words to your goat. Bleat, little goat, I pray, take the covered table away." And then the old woman vanished. Two Eyes cried for another minute or two, and then she decided to say those words. She said, "Bleat, little goat, bleat. Prepare a table with something to eat." And there before her eyes that very instant was a table set with china, crystal, silver, and food and drink such as she had never had. She ate until she could eat no more, and then she said, "Bleat, little goat, I pray, take the covered table away." When Two Eyes got home that night, she did not need to eat the dried crust of bread her mother had saved for her. Same thing happened the second day. The mother was really puzzled. She said, "One Eye, I want you to go along with Two Eyes and see what it is she does when she takes that goat to pasture." One Eye went along with Two Eyes the next day, and when they got to the pasture, Two Eyes suggested a rest. Now One Eye, who had never done any work in her whole life, was tired from the long walk and willing to rest. And as they rested, Two Eyes sang this little song. "One Eye, are you waking? One Eye, are you sleeping? One Eye, are you waking? One Eye, are you sleeping?" And her one eye fell asleep. As soon as it was asleep, Two Eyes said, "Bleat, little goat, bleat. Prepare a table with something to eat." And when she finished eating, she said, "Bleat, little goat, I pray, take the covered table away." Then she woke up One Eye and said, "One Eye, come on, it's time to go home." They went home, and the mother rushed up to One Eye and said, "One Eye, what did you see?" One Eye said, "Mother, I fell asleep." Her mother was furious and said, "Tomorrow I'll send Three Eyes." The next day Three Eyes went along with Two Eyes. They got to the pasture, and again Two Eyes suggested a rest, and Three Eyes, like her sister One Eye, was tired from the long walk and willing to rest. As they rested, Two Eyes sang this little song. "Three Eyes, are you waking?" But then she made a mistake and said, "Two Eyes, are you sleeping? Three Eyes, are you waking? Two Eyes, are you sleeping?" So only 2 of her eyes fell asleep. The third one stayed open and saw what it was Two Eyes had for dinner that night. When they went back to the house, the mother rushed up to Three Eyes and said, "Three Eyes, what did you see?" Three Eyes said, "Mother, Two Eyes says some magic words to that goat and sits down to food and drink such as we have never had on our dining room table." The mother said, "Two Eyes, bring me your goat." Two Eyes was an obedient child and brought her mother the goat. Her mother picked up her sharpest butcher knife and killed the goat. Two Eyes went out on the front steps and started to cry. The old woman appeared again and said, "Two Eyes, why are you crying?" She said, "I'm crying because my mother has killed the goat." The old woman said, "Ask your mother for the goat's entrails and bury them outside the front door." Two Eyes asked her mother for the goat's entrails, and since her mother had no use for them, she gave them to her. Two Eyes buried them outside the front door. The next day in that very spot was a magnificent silver tree bearing golden apples. The mother was ecstatic when she saw the tree and said, "One Eye, climb up that tree and pick some of those apples." One Eye climbed up the tree, but every time she reached for an apple, the branch pulled back. She could not reach an apple. The mother said, "One Eye, come down, I'll send up Three Eyes." Three Eyes climbed the tree, and every time she reached for an apple, the branch pulled back. She could not reach an apple. Two Eyes said, "Mother, that tree belongs to me. I will climb the tree and pick apples." Two Eyes climbed the tree, and every time she reached for an apple, the branch came closer so that she could pick it more easily. Now Two Eyes had an apron full of golden apples when the mother saw the king riding down the highway. She said, "Two Eyes, come down out of that tree this minute and hide under this rain barrel. I do not want to be humiliated and embarrassed by having the king see you, you who are so ordinary and so commonplace." And she put Two Eyes under the rain barrel. The king stopped his horse and said, "Good woman, to whom does this magnificent tree belong?" She said, "To my 2 daughters, One Eye and Three Eyes." The king said, "Would one of them please break off a branch for me?" The mother said, "Of course. One Eye, go break off a branch for the king." One Eye went over to the tree. She tried and tried and tried, but she could not break off a branch. The mother said, "Three Eyes, you go break off a branch for the king." Three Eyes went over, and she worked and worked and worked at it. She could not break off a branch. The king said, "Good woman, I find it strange that if this tree belongs to your 2 daughters, neither of them is able to break off a branch." Well, now by this time Two Eyes was angry, so she started rolling those golden apples out from under the rain barrel, raised the rain barrel up over her head, went up to the king and said, "Sire, that tree belongs to me." He said, "Would you please break off a branch for me?" She said, "Of course." She went over to the tree and with the greatest of ease plucked off a branch and gave it to the king. The king said, "Two Eyes, I would like to reward you for this. Is there something I can do for you?" Two Eyes said, "Yes. I have to do all of the work. I get very little to eat. May I come and live with you?" The king said yes. He put Two Eyes on his horse, and away they rode. Now the mother was not especially sorry to see Two Eyes leave, because she had that magnificent silver tree with the golden apples. But the very next day that tree was outside Two Eyes' bedroom in the king's palace. And after several weeks the king and Two Eyes were married. They lived a long and happy life. And one day, many, many years later, there was a knock at the palace door. Two Eyes went to the doorway, and there, standing in the doorway, were two old ladies, dressed in rags, begging for food, one with one eye, the other with three. Once upon a time, there lived a man who had 3 sons. The 2 older sons were spendthrifts and ne'er-do-wells. They frittered away their time and squandered their money. The youngest son was hard-working and helpful. One day, the 2 older sons said to their father, "We're going to set out in the world to seek our fortune." Their father wished them well, and off they set. After a few days, the youngest son said he'd like to join his brothers to find his fortune, too. Now, his father didn't want him to leave home because he was so helpful to him, but on the other hand, he knew his time had come, too. So he wished him well. Soon the younger brother met up with his older brothers. The older brothers said, "What are you here for?" He said, "I'd like to join you to find my fortune." The older brothers said, "How can you find your fortune if we who are older than you have not yet found ours?" The youngest brother said, "Well, nevertheless, I'd like to try." So the 3 of them walked on. After a while they came to an ant-hill. The ants were hard at work. The 2 older brothers said, "Let's step on these ants and kill them." The youngest brother said, "No, these ants have done us no harm. We must leave them alone." So they walked on. After a while they came to a pond, and on the pond were some ducks. The 2 older brothers said, "Let's shoot these ducks and roast them for dinner." The youngest brother said, "No, these ducks have done us no harm. We must leave them alone." So they walked on. After a while they came to a tree, the bark of which was covered with honey, and in the boughs of the tree was a beehive. The 2 older brothers said, "Let's build a fire at the base of the tree, smoke out the bees, and steal their honey." The youngest brother said, "No, these bees have done us no harm. We must leave them alone." So they walked on. After a while they came to a castle. Now the castle was made of stone, and everything outside the castle was made of stone. The grass, the trees, the shrubs, the flowers, the cattle, the sheep, there was nothing that was not stone. They knocked on the castle door. No one answered. They opened the door and walked in, and everything inside the castle was made of stone. The drapes, the rugs, the chairs, the tables, the lighting fixtures, everything was stone. They walked through the castle. They came to a door. They opened the door, and there in a small room sat an old man. The old man said, "What are you here for?" They said, "We're here to seek our fortune." The old man said, "You may have come to the right place. A spell was put on this castle many years ago, and everything inside and outside the castle was turned to stone, except for me and my 3 daughters. I am a king. If someone can accomplish 3 tasks, the spell will be broken. Whoever accomplishes the tasks may marry one of my daughters and inherit half of my kingdom. But if you fail any one of the tasks, you too will be turned to stone." Well, the eldest brother said he'd like to try the first task, which was to find 1,000 pearls scattered around the castle grounds between sunup and sunset. He went out at sunup the next morning. He worked all day. By sundown had found 200 pearls and was turned to stone. The middle brother went out the next day. He searched all day. By sundown had found 300 pearls and was turned to stone. The youngest brother went out the 3rd morning, sat down on the castle grounds, wondering how to go about the task, and the king of the ants came up and said, "Why are you worried?" He said, "I'm worried because unless I find 1,000 pearls by sundown, I will be turned to stone." The king of the ants said, "You saved our lives. We'll save yours." The ants found the 1,000 pearls and gave them to the youngest son, who gave them to the king. The next task was to find the king's ring at the bottom of the pond between sunup and sunset. The youngest son went out to the banks of the pond, sat down wondering how to go about the task, and the king of the ducks came up and said, "Why are you worried?" He said, "I'm worried because unless I find the king's ring at the bottom of the pond by sundown, I will be turned to stone." The king of the ducks said, "You saved our lives. We'll save yours." The ducks dove down and found the ring and gave it to the youngest son, who gave it to the king. The next morning the youngest son went into the king's room, and there were his 3 daughters, the 3 princesses, all of whom looked exactly alike. The king said, "On the lips of one is a drop of sugar. On the lips of another is a drop of syrup. On the lips of another is a drop of honey. If you can identify which of the three has the drop of honey on her lips, the spell will be broken, and you may marry one of my daughters and inherit half of my kingdom. But remember, if you fail, you will be turned to stone." Well, the youngest son looked from one princess to the other. There was no way of telling which of the three had the drop of honey on her lips. And just then, in through an open window, flew the queen bee, alighting on the lips of the princess with the drop of honey on her lips. The youngest son identified her. The spell was broken. The youngest son married the youngest princess, inherited half of the kingdom. Everything was returned to its natural form, and they all lived happily ever after.